Hello everyone. In this video, I will try to explain you one of the most difficult or misunderstood topic, which is self in Python object-oriented programming. Okay. So what I have done over here is I have defined a class and then I have defined a function over here. So in OOP terminology, whenever a function is defined inside a class, we can call it a method. Okay. So what is self? Self represents the object that is calling the method. So this is how we create an object from a class. So this is a class. When I put two brackets over here, it means that I am creating an object and then storing it in user1. Similarly, I am creating an object from user class and storing it in user2. Okay. Now, in order to call a method from a class by an object, there are two ways that you can do it. This is way 1, this is way 2. So in way 1, what I am doing is I am using class dot method name and then putting first variable as the object. Now this object exactly represents the self. So what that means is when I am executing this line in this context, self becomes user1. Okay, when I'm executing this line in this way, the self becomes user2. Now I'll explain to you with the execution as well. So when I execute this line, when I execute this with the debugger, you can see, let's just create a class over here. Okay, now the class is created, you can see over here, and we have class variables over here. And if you open it further, you can see that we have a function over here. You can see function user.setEmail. Okay, now let's close it again. Let's create two objects, user1 and user2. Now we have two objects created, user1 at EC0 and user2 at 6D0. They both require different physical space in our laptop. Now let's call setEmail method from user1. Okay, so let's go inside that method. Now what happens? You can see the local variables are changed because now we are inside this scope. Okay, global variable we would have the same ones. Now let me show it to you something cool. Okay, so you can see the value of self now is user object at EC0, and we have this over here, user object at EC0. So user1 and the self are now the same thing in this context. Okay, and the value of email is ahmad at hasabTech. Okay, moving forward, you can see that this is also printed at this particular address. Now another way to call this method is this. Now do you understand? When we call it in this way, Python automatically pass user2 as a self. That is why it becomes confusing. So once you know that this is a very simple way to call a method, this is an automatic way of Python calling a method. What happens is, behind the scenes, this is what is happening. User.setEmail user2 comma shamil at hasab.tech, but we can also write it this way. That is why this thing becomes a bit confusing to the ones who are working with Python and does not have a very foundational knowledge of how self works. So we can call it in two ways: class.method, first variable object and then arguments, or we can just directly call by object.method and then directly calling arguments that we are doing over here. Because shamil at hasab.tech and ahmad at hasab.tech is an argument to email parameter, right? So now I'm at this line. Let's move, let's go into this context. You will see that now the locals has changed. Email is shamil at hasab.tech and the self over here, let me see the self over here, which is 6D0. And if I hover over here, you can see now in this context the self becomes user2 itself. Right now when I execute this line, what's gonna happen? Self is now user2, right? So user2.email will become shamil at hasab.tech. You can see right now we don't have any of it, right? So when I execute this, you can see user.toEmail is now shamil at hasab.tech. I hope this explanation was clear and it was easy for you to understand. Thank you.